I didn't see my life as a farmer anymore. It had felt like something I had outgrown, like a coat that no longer fit no matter how long I tried to stretch into it. So I decided the wisest thing to do was to call it quits, get out, and do something else entirely. That decision brought me north, into a place where the Yukon air cuts through your lungs like broken glass, and the land never feels truly still. The mine was already running when I arrived, a dredging operation sitting in the middle of endless cold terrain, surrounded by machines that groaned and breathed like tired animals. Men moved through the fog with coffee in their hands, speaking in short bursts, conserving energy as if words themselves cost fuel. Tony was already there, boots sinking into wet ground, inspecting everything with the same quiet intensity he always carried. Nothing seemed unusual at first, just another frozen morning in a place where survival depended on routine. But beneath that normal rhythm, something unseen was already waiting. The dredge sat silent but heavy, like it was holding its breath, and no one yet knew that this would not be an ordinary day at all. The strange sound beneath the machine. It began as a sound so faint it almost blended into the working noise of the site. Engines rattled, metal clanged, gravel shifted under heavy tires, and yet underneath it all came something else. A dragging, slow vibration deep inside the dredge that didn't belong to any mechanical rhythm they knew. At first, the men dismissed it as nothing unusual. Machines out here always made strange noises in the cold. But this sound did not fade. It persisted, steady and deliberate, like something moving slowly under layers of steel and earth. Rick was the first to really notice it, pausing mid-task and looking toward the dredge with confusion. Soon others heard it too, a low pulse that seemed almost organic, like a heartbeat trapped inside metal. Tony stopped speaking entirely and turned toward it, narrowing his eyes. The sound grew clearer as he approached, then suddenly stopped as if it had noticed him too. The silence that followed felt unnatural, heavier than noise ever had. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, and for the first time that morning, everyone standing on the site felt something unspoken shift in the air around them. The silver substance beneath the steel. Tony moved closer to the dredge, his boots crunching on frozen ground while the others watched from a distance. The silence had not broken, it had only deepened. Then, without warning, a faint reflection caught his eye along the lower edge of the machine. It looked like a leak at first, something wet and metallic, but the closer he got, the more wrong it seemed. When he touched it with his glove, he froze instantly. It was cold, far colder than the surrounding air, and thick like liquid metal. It clung to his glove instead of dripping away. He lifted his hand slowly and watched as the substance shimmered under the light, shifting like something alive beneath its surface. The men behind him went quiet, unsure of what they were seeing. Rick stepped forward with a flashlight, illuminating the strange material more clearly. It reflected in unnatural waves, almost as if it was reacting to their presence. Tony tried wiping it off, but it spread instead, thinning across the fabric like it had intention. The feeling that something was fundamentally wrong began to settle in, heavy and unavoidable. The moving pattern and first signs of awareness. The strange substance did not behave like anything natural. It stopped dripping entirely and began to move on its own, sliding across the dredge surface in slow, deliberate motion. Thin, glowing lines formed as it spread, tracing shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost designed. Circles formed within circles, overlapping in patterns too precise to be random. No one spoke. Even breathing felt louder than it should have been. The air around them seemed to tighten, as though the space itself was shrinking. Tony raised his hand slowly and ordered everyone to step back. No one argued. The substance continued to expand, glowing faintly brighter, as if responding to their attention. Then the dredge itself groaned, a deep metallic sound that echoed through the valley. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. Something inside the machine felt awake, or becoming awake. The men exchanged uneasy glances, but no one moved closer. Whatever this was, it was no longer just a mechanical issue or a strange leak. It felt deliberate, intelligent even, as if the dredge had become something else entirely in front of their eyes. The voice inside the machine. As the rumbling continued, something even more unsettling emerged. A sound that was not mechanical, not natural, and not human in any way they could immediately place. It was faint at first, buried beneath metal vibration, but then it rose just enough to be heard clearly. A voice, not loud, not distinct, but undeniably present inside the dredge itself. The men froze completely. No one could understand the words, yet everyone felt their meaning in the same way cold spreads through skin. Tony turned slowly, scanning the crew's faces. Rick looked pale, shaken, admitting he had heard it too but could not make out what it said. The sound faded, replaced by a rhythmic clicking that echoed like a failing heartbeat trying to restart. The dredge then shifted violently, chains rattling, buckets clanging as though something inside had grabbed hold of it. The machine activated without warning. No operator was near the controls. Panic flickered across the site as Tony ordered it shut down, but there was nothing to shut down. The dredge was moving on its own, responding to something no one could see. Rick's descent into the structure. After the machine finally slowed, a tense stillness returned. The dredge loomed over the site like a dormant giant that might awaken again at any moment. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what step came next. Rick eventually climbed up to inspect the interior, disappearing into the metal structure with only a flashlight cutting through the dark. Minutes passed with no sound except distant engine hum and shifting boots on frozen ground. Then his voice broke through the silence, sharp and urgent, calling for Tony to come immediately. Something about his tone carried disbelief more than fear, as if what he had seen didn't belong in reality. Tony climbed after him without hesitation, the others watching anxiously from below. Inside, the air felt different, colder and heavier, as though the machine itself was breathing slowly around them. Rick pointed towards something half buried in the dredge's inner frame. Whatever it was, it did not resemble mining material or natural ore. Tony stared at it for a long time without speaking, his expression tightening in a way that told everyone this discovery would not stay on record for long. The decision to shut everything down. Tony finally stood up from the discovery site, dusted his hands, and made a decision without debate. The dredge would be shut down immediately. No explanations, no discussion, just silence and compliance. His tone left no room for argument, and the crew obeyed without question. One by one, machines powered down, engines faded, and the entire site slipped into an uneasy quiet. Even the wind seemed less certain now, moving differently across the frozen ground. Men avoided eye contact, exchanging uneasy looks instead. Something had changed the atmosphere entirely. It was no longer just a work site. It felt like a place that had witnessed something it was not meant to understand. Tony remained focused, but his silence carried weight. He did not look satisfied or relieved. He looked aware, as if shutting everything down was not a solution, but a temporary pause. The dredge stood motionless again, yet no one believed it was truly inactive anymore. Every sound that followed felt exaggerated, every movement uncertain, as though the ground itself had begun remembering what had just happened. Night returned, and the missing discovery. Later that night, after the camp had emptied and lights dimmed, Tony returned alone. The dredge stood under the Yukon sky like a dark monument. He climbed inside again, moving carefully, flashlight scanning every surface. He needed confirmation that what he had seen earlier was real, but when he reached the exact location, the object was gone. No trace remained except disturbed dust and a faint scratch in the metal. Tony stood still for a long time, listening. The silence inside the machine felt intentional, almost aware of his presence. A faint, unfamiliar smell lingered, something between rust and burnt oil. He called out once, but no answer came. Outside, the wind brushed against metal panels softly, like something tapping from the other side. He eventually stepped back out into the freezing night, unsettled but composed. The sky above was clear and endless, yet it felt like something unseen was watching from within it. The dredge, once again, appeared motionless, but its stillness no longer felt natural. It felt maintained, as if something inside it had chosen to remain quiet for now. Footprints and the unwanted presence. The next morning arrived colder than usual, or at least it felt that way. Tony returned early, finding the crew already gathered but unusually silent. Without discussion, he walked straight to the dredge. Before climbing aboard, he noticed the door slightly open. He had locked it himself the night before. Inside, condensation covered the floor, and faint footprints led deeper into the structure. They were small, unfamiliar, and too light to belong to any of the men. Tony crouched, examining them closely, his expression tightening. The prints suggested something or someone had been inside after they left. He called out firmly, but only silence answered him. Then came a whisper, indistinct but close enough to make his skin tighten. He stepped back slowly, refusing to turn his back until he reached open air again. Rick approached, asking what he found. but Tony only shook his head. The crew resumed work reluctantly, though none of them went near the dredge. The presence of something unseen now lingered over the entire site, as if the machine had begun sharing its space with something else. The changing metal and growing fear. By midday, tension had spread through the camp. No one spoke openly about what had happened, but everyone acted as if they knew. The dredge seemed different now, emitting a faint hum even when powered down. Caleb arrived holding the tarp-covered object they had recovered earlier. He looked unsettled as he reported that it was changing. When Tony uncovered it, the markings were no longer the same. The lines had shifted, softened, as if reshaped from within. One symbol resembled an eye, though none of them remembered it being there before. Tony touched it cautiously, then quickly pulled back as it seemed to react under his fingers. No one spoke after that. The object was rewrapped immediately, but the sense of discomfort remained. It felt less like equipment and more like containment, something that did not want to be contained. Even the wind seemed hesitant now, passing through the camp without its usual force. The atmosphere was no longer just tense, it felt observant, like something had begun watching them back. Night activity and the vanishing crew member. That night, the camp remained awake in fragments. Most men claimed to sleep, but few actually did. One worker reported seeing a faint light inside the dredge, a shadow moving briefly before disappearing. The next morning, he was gone. No explanation, no sign of departure, just absence. The camp grew heavier with unease. People avoided speaking directly, choosing instead to work slowly and inefficiently. The dredge remained untouched, yet its presence dominated everything. Tony observed it from a distance, saying little. Rick eventually admitted he no longer felt comfortable continuing operations there. Tony agreed without argument, though neither of them moved to leave. Something about the site still held them in place. It was not logic or profit. It was something harder to define. The feeling that leaving might not mean escape. The dredge sat unchanged, yet it no longer felt like machinery. It felt like an environment of its own, one that had begun influencing everything around it. The altered artifact and final realization. By afternoon, Caleb returned again with urgency. The covered object had changed once more. When Tony uncovered it, the markings had evolved again, now forming patterns that felt deliberate. A circular shape, almost like an eye, appeared at the center. Tony touched it and felt a subtle shift beneath his fingers, as if it acknowledged contact. He immediately withdrew his hand and ordered it covered again. No one argued. Fear had become quiet agreement among them. Later, Tony sat alone outside his cabin, watching the dredge as wind passed through the site. Rick approached holding a folded paper, saying it had been found near the shed. Tony took it without opening it immediately, sensing its importance. The camp felt suspended in uncertainty, as though waiting for something final to occur. The dredge remained silent but present, its influence undeniable. Whatever had been discovered was no longer contained to one object or one machine. It had expanded into the environment itself, and now everyone understood the same unspoken truth. Something beneath the dredge was still unfinished.